pray. I have made your name known to those whom you gave me from the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything you have given me is from you. For the words that you gave to me, I have given to them, and they have received them, and know in truth that I came from you. And they have believed that you sent me. I am asking on their behalf. I'm not asking on behalf of the world, but on behalf of those whom you gave me, because they are yours. All mine are yours, and all yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I'm coming to you. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them in your name that you have given me. I guarded them, and not one of them was lost, except the one destined to be lost, so that the scripture might be fulfilled. But now I'm coming to you, and I speak these things in the world, so that they may have my joy made complete in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. For they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes, I sanctify myself, so that they also may be sanctified in truth. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Our lesson today from the Acts of the Apostles recalls that moment in church history when, after the ascension of Jesus into heaven, but before the day of Pentecost and the coming of the Holy Spirit, the apostles start to get their plan together for this Jesus movement. Peter stands up among all the believers who had gathered there in Jerusalem and explains that the 12 apostles needed to be restored. Jesus had chosen 12 himself, after all, and so they needed to choose someone who would take Judas's place in the lineup. And Peter insisted that the person should be, the people who would be available to fill these spots needed to have a certain pedigree. The person who was to fill Judas's spot needed to have been with them throughout all of Jesus' ministry, from his baptism all the way through his ascension. And only two people in the crowd seemed to fit this description. There was this one, Joseph Barsabbas Justus, and another, Matthias. And they're put forward for consideration. And they cast lots to see who would be chosen. Casting lots, of course, means they take pot shards and write the names of the candidates on these broken pieces of pottery, put them in a basket, pray, and shake them. And the first one that pops out is understood to be God's choice in the matter. Don't laugh. My home parish chose its vestry this way. So it's still a means of making choices. Needless to say, that first piece that popped out had Matthias's name on it. And so he was deemed to be God's chosen replacement for Judas. And so the symbolic number of 12, like the 12 ancient tribes of Israel, were restored, and then the day of Pentecost soon arrived. But I ask us to consider, what about this Joseph Barsabbas Justus fellow? First of all, let's just call him Barsabbas for simplicity's sake. What became of him? Because after all, he'd known Jesus just as well as Matthias had, yet Matthias is the one with his own feast day on our calendar, not Barsabbas. So what did he do after not being chosen as an official apostle? We don't have any record of that activity, except for maybe a mention of someone who may or may not be he who traveled with Paul and Barnabas. But other than that, we have nothing else. Either he gave up on it all and went away angry that he hadn't been chosen as an apostle, or he chose to stick it out, even without the notoriety of being one of the Big 12. I like to think that Barsabbas stuck it out. I also imagine that he began to see his non-selection as more of a blessing than a curse. The 12 apostles ended up having big jobs, and some of them were quite well known. They seem to have led very public lives and had important roles to play in the development of the early church. Their public roles carried, I'm sure, certain expectations from the people with whom they worked and responsibilities toward those people. And so their ministries were perhaps impeded by being so well known. Barsabbas, on the other hand, had the privilege of not being a public figure. He could go about his work and ministry unimpeded by the day-to-day demands of being one of those high-profile apostles. Barsabbas could claim his own apostleship, even without the official title, and go out as one who is sent to do God's work. He could do ministry the way that Jesus had taught, that is, quietly and without expectation of public recognition or accolade. He could serve God's people without anyone knowing. The apostles, however, were not afforded such a luxury. And in some sense, the place of the official apostles in the life of the church became exactly what Jesus had preached against. I mean, just look at me right now. Apparently, Amanda and Larry and I are supposed to be the authorities on all things spiritual and ministerial in this community. And unlike Barsabbas, for better or for worse, everyone knows our names, and sometimes you take it in vain. I don't blame you. We wear fancy outfits that cost way too much money. We stand up in front and we get the most important seats, and we talk more than anybody else does during the entire service. We get fancy titles before our names that look lovely when they arrive in the mail on letters. And we get credit for the successes at church even when we deny having anything to do with them. And, at least Larry has this going for him, Amanda and I get paid for doing all of this. This is hardly what Jesus had in mind when he sent his apostles out with only the cloak on their shoulders and the sandals on their feet. No, real ministry isn't accomplished by the folks with the fancy titles and vestments. Real ministry is accomplished by folks who are unknown and unacknowledged, who simply claim a ministry as their own and allow the Holy Spirit to empower them to do it. Yet, one author writes that we have become, in many senses, a sedentary Christianity, couch potato do-gooders. He mentions how easy it is to write a check to help another engage in ministry, but that it would be good for our sedentary selves if we found more active ways to be engaged in our own ministry. I like to think that Barsabbas got active after the lot casting was done. He wasn't chosen to be one of the Big 12, but I'll imagine, or I will choose to imagine, that he still claimed the role, just like anyone can. I also imagine that he was all the more successful at it, even more than Matthias, who was chosen as an official 12. Being an apostle means literally being one who is sent, and sent with work to accomplish. And so I ask us on this day to consider, what are we being sent to do? What are we claiming as our own ministry? What are we claiming as our work as an apostle, even if it will never be known by anyone but God? How are we making the risen Christ known in our world today? As Barsabbases, the fortunate ones are able to do ministry as Jesus taught, quietly, earnestly, and lovingly. So claim your ministry and pray for the Spirit's guidance and power to accomplish it. And despite what the world tells you or doesn't tell you about your worth in the life of the community, be the apostle that God has chosen you to be, lot or no lot.